Our next speaker is Dr. Haley Peckham, and she is presenting to us today. Of course it's happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean that it's not real? Validating the impact of complex trauma without diagnosing disorder. I'd like to draw your attention to page 10 of your conference guide. There is no way I'm going to do enough service for Dr. Haley Peckham to give you the complete bio, other than to say that she is curious about brain and mind and has been for a long time. She also has a background in studying philosophy, which I think is incredibly powerful for most of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, could you help me to welcome Dr. Haley Peckham?
Thanks very much. I find it a little bit unnerving when I'm clapped before I've given the talk, but I appreciate your goodwill and intentions. So my name's Haley Peckham, and I'm here today with a number of perspectives, and I'm just myself, all right? I'm bringing you the best I can with what I have. I did study philosophy. I'm an avid reader of the Harry Potter books, and we'll get into that. I'm also a mental health nurse. I trained in the UK. I have lived experience, but I was never diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. To be frank, I was very scared of getting that diagnosis. I'm also a neuroscientist. I finished my PhD last year, maybe the year before. And it's in neuroscience. It's in mechanisms of neuroplasticity, which is something that I want to share with you today. I'm really passionate about it. It's about how experiences shape brains and how that both gives us compassion for our pasts and hope for our futures. And because I am so muddled up in this, I'm a clinician, I also have some experience of my own, and I'm a neuroscientist. I'm speaking to everyone in this room who has a brain. Everyone. This is a very inclusive talk. Okay, so who's read the Harry Potter books? Who hasn't? Only that this might be a spoiler. This is a spoiler alert, okay? So if you don't want to know, then put your fingers in your ears. For those of you who've read the Harry Potter books, do you remember the part where Harry Potter has just been Avada Kedavraed by Lord Voldemort? Bryn, thank you for being brave enough to say that earlier. We think that Harry may be dead. We don't know. But he's in this place. It looks a little bit like King's Cross Station in the UK, but much cleaner. And he's there with Professor Dumbledore, and they're having a conversation about what happens to Harry next. And just as Professor Dumbledore is leaving, Harry turns to him and he says, "Professor, is this real, or is it happening in my head?" And Dumbledore, who is a wise and kind man, he says, "Of course it's happening in your head, Harry, but why on earth would that mean it isn't real?" And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is ways of validating experience, of ways of validating struggle, ways of validating pain that don't necessarily mean they have to come with a diagnosis. So it just opens up the possibilities of getting validation for any of the things that any of us may struggle with. There we go. So I bet none of you are looking at these trees thinking, oh, they're all suffering some strange disease that makes them bend over in the middle. And you'd be right. These trees grow on Slope Point, which is the southernmost tip of the southern island of New Zealand. And there they face winds that come from the Antarctic that are uninterrupted for 2,000 miles. So they have so much momentum in them that when they hit these trees bend with those winds. So they are buckled. They surrender to the winds in order to survive, to adapt to the environment in which they live. And it compromises them. It compromises their growth. They can't get as much light as they would be able to if they grew straight. Nevertheless, they are survivors. But it's not so obvious with human beings. Oops. We can't look at someone and know what their experiences have been. We can't even look at someone and really know what they feel. Is this man having a moment of solitude or reflection? Is he in despair and think of walking into the water? Is he depressed? We don't really know. So, who's called in sick to work at some point in their lives? What, the others of you just don't show up? Who feels a little bit better if when they call into work they sound nasally? Yeah, I do, for sure. I found this cartoon which made me chuckle. It's called Acceptable Reasons for an Intern to Call in Sick. And the reasons include projectile vomiting, appendix flying out of abdomen and exploding in midair, septic shock requiring intubation, or death, which poses an obvious problem of how to make the call. It's easier for other people to accept that there is something wrong with us when it's evident. But so many sicknesses and so much pain and struggle is not evident. As in PTSD Awareness Month, it's true to say that not all wounds are visible. Many people struggle with really painful internal narratives, telling themselves that they're worthless or inadequate, that they're terrible people, that they deserve the awful things that happen to them. It's an incredibly painful way of living, and it may be invisible. But sometimes pain is evident, even in animals. This is a picture by Friedrich Schenkt, and it's called Anguish. It's the anguish of this sheep. His lamb has died. And sometimes it is visible in people's faces when we see them in despair or locked somewhere far away from us. But one of the questions that I think comes up with BPD is that eternal question of, is this real or is this in my head? Should I do something about this? Or is this understandable because I'm ill? I found this on Pinterest. BPD is never really knowing if your behaviours are yours or your illnesses. Do people relate with that? Yeah? Okay. So is this me or is this my illness? So if I've got a diagnosis, then I have this diagnosis. Somebody has ratified, has legitimised my struggle as I'm ill, and it's not my fault. But without that diagnosis, what are we left with? We're left with these things that people may say to us or things that people may hear. It's all in your head. You're crazy, you're manipulative, attention-seeking, stupid, selfish, thoughtless, worthless, irrational. I really hate being called irrational when I'm emotional. I'm like, of course, I'm not rational. I'm emotional. They are different things. Volatile, behavioral. And the tendency that we have when these things are applied to us is to blame ourselves, to tell ourselves that it's our fault. On the one hand, the diagnosis brings a validity, which leaves these being without diagnosis a sense of not being valid, of the struggle not being legitimate. If I'm ill, then the symptoms are not my fault. And so, I'm ill. I am worthy of understanding, of compassion, and of your help and time. But if I'm not ill, and this is me, then these aren't symptoms. They are my character. They are my fault. And that makes me less worthy of your understanding, your compassion, and your help. It makes me judge myself harshly, and it may make others judge me harshly too. But I think that this is a false dichotomy. Either I'm ill or I'm not ill. Either I am responsible or I am not responsible. I think this is a trick, And I want there to be another way of validating struggle without necessarily having to buy into this idea of being ill. And this is where my PhD in neuroplasticity comes in. I love science, and I love brains. And the thing that's awesome about neuroplasticity is it's the science of how our experiences shape our brains and everything that means. If our experiences shape our brains, then it automatically gives us some understanding and compassion. Of course I'm the way I am. How could I have turned out differently given the experiences I've had? And it also gives us some hope for the future. If experiences change brains, then surely I can start choosing where I can better experiences that will help me develop a brain and body that I feel more at home in and more at peace in. Brains are like plasticine. They're sculpted by experience. So neuroplasticity is the way that neural systems adapt to experience, and I like to talk about this using a water metaphor. So if you think of experiences as being like raindrops, there are many, many raindrops. Not any one raindrop makes a big difference, although, and the same is true for experiences, except if an experience is infused with fear or terror. That would make it like a large raindrop. It would make a big difference. The rain of experience falls onto the brain, and just as rain falls, it forms puddles, and water will then run down the path of least resistance, and our experiences will form neural pathways and run down those neural pathways of least resistance. As these experiences run, they form channels. And that means the next time it rains and the next time there are more experiences, they will be running down pre-existing grooves. And really gradually, rain and experiences create the landscape in geographical terms, as well as the landscape of our brains. So there's 4 mechanisms of neuroplasticity. Now I usually do a day training on this, but I'm going to bang it into probably 4 minutes for you. So is everyone listening? Okay. The first is epigenetics. Who's heard of epigenetics? Excellent. Does it excite you? Yeah. It's amazing. It's how nurture can write its way into nature. What epigenetics means is that experiences can alter or can become these tiny chemical groups that either attach to genes or to the DNA that the genes wraps around. And the effect they have is to turn these genes up or turn these genes down. Experiences of malnutrition, for example, will change some of the genes that form the enzymes that you use for metabolism. So they'll change how you metabolize food in order to help you survive the next time there isn't enough food. Our experiences, and this has been proven in animal models, our experiences of early care calibrate our stress system by determining how many glucocorticoid receptors we have. And glucocorticoid receptors are the receptors for the stress hormone cortisol. So that's a way of determining how your stress system functions and responds, and how quickly it can go back to normal. Neurogenesis is about the birth of new neurons and how they are integrated into the existing network. It's thought to contribute to new memories, or the way that we hold old memories. You know, if you have a relationship breakup, the story you tell about that the day after it's happened and the week after it's happened will be different to the story you tell in 6 months' time. And if it isn't, then you're probably in trouble. You want those stories to change. You want those memories to change as with the telling. Scientists study neurogenesis in food-hoarding birds. So the food-hoarding birds are the birds that in the autumn, they collect up all of their berries and nuts and what have you, and then they squirrel them away for the winter when food is scarce. It helps them survive. Food-hoarding birds have an increase in their rate of neurogenesis in the autumn. You'd expect that. That makes sense, right? That's when they need to remember things. But what's interesting is that birds that are exposed to very harsh environments where food is very scarce have a much higher rate of neurogenesis in the autumn than birds who are in a benign environment. So again, what this is showing us is that our experiences of the environment shape our brains and physiology in ways that are meaningful, ways that help us survive the best we can. And next on to synaptic plasticity and white matter plasticity. Synaptic plasticity is about the building of neural pathways. So it was Donald Hebb, a Canadian, who said, "Neurons that fire together, wire together." He said this before it was even discovered. It was discovered 46 years ago by Tim Bliss and Terry Lomo. They discovered long-term potentiation, the creation of neural pathways. We know that experience shapes brains, otherwise we wouldn't build schools. We know that we have to create new neural pathways. We know that learning is possible. We really do know that experience makes a profound difference to our experience of ourselves and what we learn, what we know. White matter plasticity is when neural pathways have had so much traffic down them, they've been rehearsed and practiced so many times that it becomes worthwhile building like a biological pipe. And that pipe is called myelination. The myelin makes the transfer of the energy down that neural pathway faster, more efficient, automatic, and that's brilliant for all those good habits you have. Brushing your teeth at night, yep, second nature, don't think about it, I do that. Driving a car, I can do that, and I can talk at the same time. Not on a mobile phone, I can't do that. I'm not that good. But these things become automatic with practice. However, so did all of my bad habits. My habits of self-harm, my habits of self-talk that was self-critical, those habits also became second nature to me because I practiced and rehearsed them. So white matter plasticity is something that we have to treat with caution. We have to be careful what we practice. We have to be careful what we do over and over again. We have to be careful of the minutiae that our lives are made of. If you look in the brains of piano players, as opposed to non-musicians, you'll see that their brains are different. This doesn't mean that the piano players are sick. What you see is in their fine motor cortex, they have much more myelin than most of us. And that's because they've practiced and practiced and practiced, so those finger movements are now automatic. So the myelin has built up. They've got better and better and better at it. So when there is a difference in one brain to another brain, that doesn't necessarily imply illness. It can imply different experiences, different things have been practiced. This is also true for learning to meditate. It's also true for juggling. It's also true for learning a second language and learning to read. Our experience changes our brain. Another example is socioeconomic status. That determines brain structure. But it doesn't mean that one socioeconomic status is healthy and the other is sick. More to the point, one is desirable and one isn't. But the change in brain structure between the two does not imply sickness. It also doesn't imply that one is normal. Brains are adaptive. They adapt to the experiences that we give them. For better and worse, our experiences shape our brains. They shape our brains to help us survive the environment we first encounter. And the environments we first encounter are very different. Some of us are born into warm and connected families, and others of us are not so lucky. And even in warm and connected families, there can be things that are still traumatic. It's not clear-cut. Nevertheless, wherever you were born, whatever your early relationships were like, your brain does the very best it can to make sense of what's happened, to predict what's likely to happen, and help you cope with it. And for some of us, that might mean living in anxiety or living in fear in case what's happened before happens again. And for others of us, that might also mean that we can be glad that what's happened before may happen again. Both trauma and privilege are real. They're neurobiological and they are in our heads. But this isn't bad. This is good news. One, it means our feelings are valid. Hooray! And two, it means our struggle is real. And although it's not great to struggle, it's great to know that your struggle is a real struggle and not an imagined one. If experiences literally shape our brains, it means that we can step into being what this guy's doing. We can start pruning our neural pathways, not literally with a pair of scissors, but we can start creating the neural pathways we want, rehearsing the neural pathways we want to get better at. We can start curating our experiences to shape our brains, our bodies, and our physiology to become easier places to live in. Whether we see ourselves as sick or whether we see ourselves as suffering because of experiences we may have had, it doesn't matter. They're both real. They're both real struggles. I really like this reframe. A diamond is a chunk of coal that did well under pressure. I like that because it's actually kind of chemically true. I also like, I used to think I was overreacting. Now I realize it was just a normal reaction to an abnormal amount of bullshit. However, speaking from personal experience, I've changed the environment that I was in. I now have moved to a different environment, and that's a whole new thing to learn. And what I tell myself is, the way my brain is, it isn't my fault. It isn't my fault. I am worthy of understanding, of compassion, and help. And what I have on my fridge, I wrote it years ago, it says, it's not your fault, but it's 100% your responsibility to sort out. And what I mean here is not anything invalidating. I mean that when we have experiences over and over again, when I have experiences over and over again of things that don't feel good to me, I want to have less of those, fewer of those experiences. And I want to have more of the good experiences. And I want to apply myself in my life to doing that. And I know it will be a long job. So this is what I advocate. Choose your experiences to change your brain. This cartoon is from a website called Zen Pencils. Gavin there has given me permission to use it in my talks. I'll read it to you. Decide in your heart of hearts what really excites and challenges you, and start moving your life in that direction. Every decision you make, from what you eat to what you do with your time tonight, turns you into who you are tomorrow and the day after that. Look at who you want to be and start sculpting yourself into that person. You may not get exactly where you thought you'd be, but you will be doing things in a profession that suit you, in a profession that you believe in. Don't let life randomly kick you into the adult you don't want to become. And that quote's from Chris Hadfield. So just in summary, our neuroplastic mechanisms help us to adapt. And some of us may see what's happened to us as being pathology, and others may see it as adaptation. And as a recovery-oriented clinician, I don't see it as my business to change the way that people understand themselves. I see it as my job to respect it. But what I want to do, and what I'm trying to do here today, is open up the narrative of validation. I don't want validation to just be about medical model diagnosis. I want it to also include being able to validate people's struggles. And that extends to all of us, clinicians too. The dominance of the medical model tends to mean that we ask, what's wrong with you? And we could be asking as well, what's happened to you? Tell me your story. I worked with a young woman on a ward, and we had lots of conversations, and I had a good therapeutic relationship with her. And she found a quote that she was terribly pleased with, and she came to me, and I think of it when I see these trees. The quote that she came up with said, "If you don't like where you are, move. You are not a tree." This is the thought I want to leave all of you with. What's inside your head is real. Thanks very much for your attention.
Oh, who wishes you had this woman as your science teacher? Seriously, we'd all be so much better off for the experience. Thank you, Haley. That was just amazing. I think it gave a beautifully rounded view of another perspective as well. And can we say thank you? We always like to thank people with emotion-inducing experiences in the form of chocolate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. We probably have time, if we can, for two or three questions. Have we got anyone that would like to ask a question? We've got one here. Let's start with that. Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Through my DBT training, through Marshall Arnhem, John Kabat-Zinn, you know, through the Buddhist philosophy and stuff like that, you know, it's told, because that sort of blew me away a little bit, you know, saying what's inside your head is real, because, you know, it's taught to you through DBT that thoughts are just thoughts and feelings are just feelings. They're not necessarily real. So what's your view on that?
I guess my view on that is that the attitude we hold to our thoughts and feelings is also in our heads and is also real. So I guess what I mean is that when I get caught in my own emotional storms, you know, whatever they are, what I try and practice, this won't last forever. I don't always feel like this. When I'm in that, of course, I go, it doesn't matter, it still feels this terrible at the moment. I'm practicing getting better at doing practicing what I preach, literally. I practice not holding on to those things. I practice where I can, if I can see that I'm heading off down a negative thought path, which incidentally, I do, if I'm walking somewhere and I'm in a hurry, right, my heart rate goes up and I start thinking things that make me angry. I find that strange. So I deliberately think, oh, I'm in a hurry, that's what's going on here. So I slow down. And by slowing down and taking a few deep breaths, I change my physiology a bit and it helps me change my thinking. Sometimes I have a shower. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You know, I practice. Yeah, thank you.
Can I indulge myself with a question? I think for many of us, particularly as parents of children with, I'm calling it big emotions at times, we hear it's not what's wrong with you but what happened to you. And I have a moment where I go, I was a good mother. I was a good mother. What are they saying? And I guess it's that sort of distinction between the child's perception of the way that their life experiences were versus potentially, I'll only speak for myself, a mother's view of going, I know what happened, I was there. You know, that's a really interesting thing, the dynamics that can play out there. So how do you help families reconcile that if there's a perspective from one person's view of something that others might call normal, whatever that word is, it's a setting on the washing machine, thank you, Jackie Crow. How do we reconcile with that within a group dynamic, such as a family?
I'm really glad you asked that question. It's a tough one and a good one. It's always difficult when people have different perspectives. And I find it a gift that's sometimes hard to accept in my own personal relationships, that someone else has their own perception of what just happened. And I have mine. And I have no right to dismantle theirs, even if I really don't like it. and sometimes I really don't. And I also don't want to dismantle my own. And so that really difficult and actually psychologically very sophisticated thing is then being asked of me, and we ask it of others, is to be able to hold my perspective and able to hold that somebody else's perspective may be different to mine. And I also want to say that I really don't want to go anywhere near blame here. I don't. Somebody said earlier about generations of trauma, and I resonate with that. I don't want to be blaming anyone. I do the best I can. My mum did the best she could. My dad did the best he could. What I want to do is, as much as I possibly can, take responsibility for myself where I can, which isn't always, in moving forward. So it's the difference between blaming and getting caught up in that and wanting to take responsibility where I can to move forward. So thank you for bringing that out. Yeah.
Thank you. I want a pocketbook of Dr. Haley to carry around with me, just to pull
I'm
it
pretty
out
little.
and remind myself of some of those notes. That was not
It's
a
a big
size
pocket.
as anyway. Okay. Can we say thank you very much, please?
Thank you very much.